welcome to this teleconference session. Today we are going to talk about human energy requirements. This topic is from the Advanced Nutrition course, which is part of the Master's Program in Dietetics and Food Service Management. The human energy requirements are particularly important, or a study of the energy requirements are particularly important because we know energy is required to carry out the various activities of the body. Now, energy is the ability to do work. We know our body needs energy to carry out the various activities. And how do we get this energy? Obviously, the energy is obtained from the food we eat, and in the food are present the nutrients, particularly the macronutrients which provide energy. Which are these macronutrients? As a student of nutrition, certainly our learners would know that carbohydrates, fats and proteins are the three major macronutrients which provide energy. These three macronutrients, they provide energy in the ratio, say 1 gram of carbohydrate provides 4 kilocalories, 1 gram of fats provide 9 kilocalories, and 1 gram of proteins also provide 4 kilocalories. If you look at your monitors, you can see now the physiological sources of energy, what we just talked about, carbohydrates, proteins, fats. These are the physiological sources of energy, and they are the macronutrients present in food. 1 gram of carbohydrate yields 4 kilocalories, 1 gram fat 9 calories, and 1 gram of protein yields 4 kilocalories. Therefore, these values, what you have just seen on the screen, are called or are known as the physiological fuel factor. Now, with this basic understanding about the physiological fuel factors, we will move further to find out how do we measure energy. We just talked about 1 gram carbohydrate providing 4 kilocalories. Well, the unit of energy is kilocalories. What do we mean by kilocalories? If you will look at your monitors now, you would see a typical definition of kilocalories. It is defined as the amount of heat required to raise the temperature of 1 kg of water through 1 degree Celsius. Now, this definition, according to this, you can easily relate that it is the amount of energy which is being released by a particular food, which is measured in terms of kilocalories. Well, in India, we measure energy in terms of kilocalories, but if you would pick up few Western books, you would realize that the energy is also measured in terms of joules or kilojoules. What is the relationship between kilocalorie and kilojoules? If you look at the monitor once again, you would see that 1 kilocalorie is equivalent to 4.184 kilojoules. So it will be very easy for you to convert your energy requirements from kilocalories to kilojoules or from kilojoules to kilocalories. Now, this is about the unit of energy. Then, what do we mean by the energy requirements? Now, this is a very important aspect. This whole session is about energy requirements. What do we mean by energy requirements? Now, if you look at the monitor, energy requirement is defined as the amount of food energy needed to balance energy expenditure in order to maintain body size, body composition, and a level of necessary and desirable physical activity, and to allow optimum growth and development of children, deposition of tissues during pregnancy, and secretion of milk during lactation consistent with long-term good health. Now, this was a big definition, but what are the factors or the main points which emerge from this definition? We said energy requirements. It is the energy required to balance first what? Energy expenditure. Energy expenditure which is in relation to body size, composition, the physical activity an individual takes. This is one aspect, and you would see that this total energy expenditure, particularly in case of adult, is equal to the total energy requirement. But when it comes to children or other physiological conditions like pregnancy and lactation, then the energy requirements, in addition to the energy expenditure for all these aspects we've talked about, we need energy for growth, development, as in the case of children. That was the second aspect covered in this definition. And we need energy for the deposition of tissues during pregnancy and the secretion of milk during lactation. Therefore, these are the aspects which get covered in energy requirements. When we talk about energy requirements, these are the aspects which we tend to cover in energy requirements. Here we talked about energy requirement. This is the amount of energy which balances energy expenditure. What do we mean by total energy expenditure? I would like to just take this up quickly. If you look at the monitor, total energy expenditure may be defined as the energy spent on average in a 24-hour period by any individual or a group of individuals. That means for the various activities which are being carried out in a 24-hour period, these activities, the energy which is utilized to carry out these activities. What are these activities? We will take up in a little while from now. But the total energy required or expended to carry out the activities in a 24-hour period is the total energy expenditure. Therefore, if what we have discussed so far, if I can just sum up for you, which is beautifully presented in your next slide, the components of energy requirements. If you look at the monitors, what we have discussed so far, we have said that the energy is required, or we need energy to balance total energy expenditure. The total expenditure includes what? It includes, if you look, it includes the basal metabolic rate. I will talk and let you know what do we mean by this. This accounts to 45 to 70% of the total energy expenditure in our body. Then it includes the physical activity here, which accounts for 15 to 30% of the total energy expended in a day. And thermogenesis, the metabolism of food in the body, requires some energy, and this accounts for 10% of the total energy expenditure. And in adults, like I said, the energy requirement or the energy needed balances the total energy expenditure, and this total expenditure is the energy requirement for an adult. But when we talk about other age groups, like in children, to the total energy expenditure, growth and development becomes a very important component of energy requirement. During pregnancy and lactation, these are the physiological stress conditions, the deposition of tissue and the secretion of milk during lactation. This further requires energy, and this component adds on to the total energy requirement of an individual. So with this, I hope you have understood that what are the different components or the features which are contributing to our total energy requirement. Now let us take each one of these components separately. We talked about BMR. What is BMR? Thermogenesis, physical activity, growth, development, how these different issues, what they are and how they influence BMR. The total energy requirement is what we will take up now. Let us start with basal metabolism. We said that we need energy to carry out various activities. Well, there are various activities. We wake up, we go to work, or children go to school, we do the various activities, the household activities. These are what we call as the voluntary activities which we do. However, there are certain activities which are carried out by our body without our knowing it. For example, our heart beats. Have you ever thought our heart goes on beating without day in, day night, without any effort? The digestive system works, the respiration goes on, the blood flows in our body, the body temperature is maintained. How is this possible? This is possible because of the various the systems working, and these systems working require energy. These are the involuntary activities for which energy is required, and this is the basal metabolism, and the energy required to perform these basal metabolic activities is called the basal metabolic rate. As you would notice on your monitors, the amount of energy used for basal metabolism in a period of time is called the basal metabolic rate. And important is, how do we measure it? You see, if you look at the monitor, it says it is measured under standard conditions. What do we mean by standard conditions? Being awake in a supine position, meaning lying position, after 10 to 12 hours of fasting and 8 hours of physical rest, and being in a state of mental relaxation in an ambient environment temperature that does not elicit heat generating or heat dissipating processes. That means our body is in a state of complete rest. The digestive system is in a state of rest, no physical activity, relaxed, and the basal, the energy required to carry out then the body processes is called the basal metabolism, and this factor accounts for approximately 45 to 70% of the total energy requirement for individual. Of course, the requirements vary. Why, how, we will take up subsequently, but this was a brief introduction to you about what is basal metabolism and the basal metabolic rate. After this, let us now talk about the second aspect, which is thermogenesis. Before I take up thermogenesis, I would like to tell you about, there are certain terms when you will talk about basal metabolic rate, or when you will read about basal metabolic rate, you will come across terms like basal energy expenditure or resting metabolic rate. I think it is important for us to understand what is the difference between these aspects. Basal metabolic rate, or BMR, I said, is the energy required to carry out the basic the basal metabolic activities in a for an individual. Now, if you look at your monitors, when BMR is commonly extrapolated to 24 hours to be more meaningful, it is referred to basal energy expenditure, and it is expressed as kilocalories per 24 hours, which means in a 24-hour period, when we convert BMR expressed as kilocalories per 24 hour, it becomes basal energy expenditure. Similarly, resting metabolic rate is the second aspect. When RMR is measured in subjects in a supine or sitting position in a comfortable environment several hours after a meal without any significant activity. You see, in BMR it was in a complete state of rest, whereas in RMR, when we are measuring RMR, of course the person could be in a sitting position as well, but relaxed, but not in a complete as in basal metabolic rate, where it was complete free from any kind of physical activity. Here there is not any significant activity, but the person is in a resting position, and it becomes the resting metabolic rate. And when this is extrapolated to 24-hour period, then it becomes the resting energy expenditure, like the basal energy expenditure. So it was important for us to differentiate between BMR and BEE, and the resting metabolic rate and the resting energy expenditure. I hope with this concept of BMR is clear. Next, we move on to the second component which impacts the total energy expenditure, which we said is thermogenesis. What do we mean by thermogenesis? It is actually the thermic effect of food. If you look at your monitors now, it is the increase in energy expenditure which is associated with the consumption of food. That means whatever we eat, the energy which is required for its metabolism is the thermogenic effect or the thermic effect of food, and it is approximately 10% of TEE. It is the metabolic response to food, which increases total energy expenditure by about 10% of the BMR over a 24-hour period in individuals eating a mixed diet. By a mixed diet, we mean a diet which contains proteins, fats, carbohydrates, all the nutrients which are required by the body, including the micronutrients too. And a mixed diet like this produces a thermic effect which accounts to about 10% of the BMR over a 24-hour period. So this was about the thermic effect of food. Now, can we move further to the third aspect which we talked was the physical activity. Physical activity is clear. You see, I talked earlier that during a day we carry out various activities. Now, some of these activities can be obligatory activities and some of them can be discretional activities. What do I mean by obligatory, the discretionary activities? I will just take up. We have talked about the voluntary activities earlier. The involuntary are the the activities linked with the basal metabolism. The voluntary activities like walking or doing your work or performing the activities which one would take up while performing the job, these all come under the physical activities or the voluntary activities, and these activities are further divided into obligatory activities and the discretionary activities. What are these? If you look at the monitor, the obligatory activities, in addition to occupational work, obligatory activities include daily activities such as going to school, tending to the home and family, other demands made by children and adults by their economic, social and cultural environment. These are your obligatory activities. The discretionary activities, they include regular practices of physical activity for fitness. Very often, many of us would like to go for a walk, would like to go to a gym. These kind of activities become discretional activities over and above the activities we perform during the day, and these together with the obligatory activities will contribute to the total physical activity of an individual. So we have looked at the basal metabolic rate, which impacts the total energy expenditure. We have talked about thermogenesis, the thermic effect of food, and we have talked about the physical activities which impact our energy requirement. These three together lead to the total energy expenditure, and this is the total energy requirement for an adult in the case of adult. But what happens in case of children? In children, the growth and development gets added on to the energy requirement. Now, what are the energy needs? If you look at the monitors now, the energy cost of growth has two components. The energy needed to synthesize growing tissues. We know that during the first year, the child grows really fast. The rate of growth is fast, and the tissues are being developed, and energy is required to synthesize the growing tissues, and the energy is deposited in these tissues. Therefore, energy is required for growth development because of these reasons. And if you notice, the energy cost of growth is about 35% of total energy requirement during the first 3 months of age. Now you can very well appreciate the kind of energy required, and it rapidly falls to about 5% at 12 months and about 3% in the second year, and remains at 1 to 2% until mid-adolescent and negligible in the late teens. Therefore, the growth development are important components of energy requirements. Other than growth and development, we talked about the physiological conditions like pregnancy and lactation which put extra demands for energy. Let us take them quickly. The requirement during pregnancy. If you look at the monitors once again, during pregnancy, extra energy is needed for the growth of the fetus. And to support this fetus, the placenta and various maternal tissues such as the uterus, the breasts, and the fat stores, these get deposited to support the growth of the fetus, as well as there are changes in the maternal metabolism, and all these impact on the energy requirement. Therefore, pregnancy becomes an important physiological condition. Along with pregnancy, lactation. The energy cost of lactation, as you can see on your monitors, has two components: the energy content of the milk secreted and the energy required to produce the milk. Now, this puts on additional demand for energy, and any well-nourished lactating mother can derive part of this additional requirement from the reserves which are accumulated even during pregnancy. Therefore, now you've got a good picture of the various components of energy requirements, how the total energy expenditure in case of adult is equivalent to the energy requirement, and in case of children, pregnancy, lactation, the energy required for growth development, for deposition of tissues, secretion of milk gets added on to the energy requirement. Now, this was the basis of energy requirement. Now, we have seen that the energy requirement differed from individual to individual. Why? Obviously, all these factors, we have the factors or the components we have covered. There are various factors which influence these components. For example, there are factors which influence the BMR, the thermogenesis or the thermic effect of food, the physical activities, and this is what we would like to take up now in this session. There are primarily, there are three factors which influence the energy requirements. If you look at your monitors now, they are there for you. The factors affecting the BMR, the factors affecting the thermic effect of food, and the factors which affect the energy expended in physical activity. We will take each one of them, or each of these factors one by one, starting with the factors which influence the basal metabolic rate. We said what is basal metabolic rate? We said that it is the energy required to carry out the basal activities of the body. Now, there are various factors which influence the basal metabolism. Now, these factors are, if you start, the first and the foremost is the body size and composition, age, gender, the hormone status. In addition to this, the physiological stress conditions like pregnancy and lactation, we talked earlier. Then fever, illness, all these factors can influence the BMR. If you look at the monitors, these factors which we've just talked about are listed. The body size and composition, age, gender, hormonal status, environmental conditions, pregnancy, lactation, fever, illness, infection, injury, nutritional status, and there are other factors too. Quickly, I would like to take up a few of these. In fact, let us just cover each one of them to give you an idea of how these factors influence the BMR. Let us begin with the body size and composition. What do we mean by body size? Body size is the weight, height of an individual. Body composition, it is, our body is made up of the fat mass and the free fat mass or the muscle. This is the metabolic active tissue in the body. What happens when, say, in case of adult as compared to elderly? In adult, the body has more of the fat-free mass, and this is the metabolic active tissue. This requires more energy, and this impacts on energy requirements. If you look at the monitor, this aspect is very clearly highlighted. The size of the fat-free mass, which is the weight of the body less than the weight of its fat mass. The muscle, basically, that minus the fat in the body, this influences. So any individual who has a higher degree of fat-free mass or the lean body mass, the free fat mass is actually the metabolic active tissue in the body, what we also call as the lean body mass, and most of the variation in BMR between people can be accounted for the variation in the free fat mass. Now you would see that in the elderly, as they age, the free fat mass becomes less, and hence the energy or the BMR reduces, which impacts on the energy requirement. The second factor we talked was age, and elderly is the example that as we age, the free fat mass decreases, the fat mass increases, and hence the metabolic rate slows down and the energy requirements come down for the elderly. Now, along with age, gender, we see that a female of the same age, body size and composition will have less energy requirement than a male of the same age, body weight, height. Why? It is again to do with the body composition. Women have more of fat mass as compared to the free fat mass or the lean body tissue, which is the active tissue. Therefore, for women, the BMR is lower as compared to men. Then the other factor we talked about was the hormonal status. You see, particularly the thyroid status. You've heard of hypothyroidism. That is when there is lack of the thyroxine, which is the hormone produced by the body, which leads to hypothyroidism. In that condition, the BMR reduces, whereas in hyperthyroidism is the condition when the thyroid activity is increased. And this is, you see, thyroid hormone is basically linked with the body's ability to carry out the activities, and when any fluctuation in this hormone, thyroxine, will impact the BMR, and it could be anything between plus to minus 50% increase or decrease in the requirements, depending on whether it is lack of the thyroid hormone or the increase of the thyroid hormone. Even just during menopause, just before menopause, you see there are a lot of fluctuations in the energy or in the metabolic rate of women, and this influences the energy requirement through its impact on the basal metabolic rate. So our hormonal status influences the energy requirement. In addition to this, if you remember, in the list we talked about the environmental conditions or the situations which impact. Let me give you an example. You see, in cold environments, in such conditions the BMR is high, or it is high, but of course it will be influenced by the clothing or the fat in the body. If the body is well protected, then naturally the energy expended to carry out the activities will be lower, but generally cold climates increase the energy requirement, whereas in hot conditions like in India, which is a tropical country, the BMR of Indians is slightly lower, about 5% lower than their counterparts in the Western countries. Therefore, the energy requirements when worked out come because of the lowered BMR are computed lower. So the hot or the cold climate environment influences the energy requirement. In addition to this, altitudes, high altitudes, the hypoxia or lack of oxygen because of altitudes influences the BMR as well. So environmental conditions influence the BMR. In addition to environmental conditions, there are certain conditions like fever, illness, disease which influence. You see, every 1 degree rise in temperature influences the BMR. 7% increase in BMR is noticed. Therefore, when fevers, in conditions of fevers, the BMR increases, and therefore the energy requirements go up. Like fevers, when there are severe, sepsis, or there is a trauma, or burns, like when there are 40% burns, the surface area, 40% surface area is affected by burns. the energy or the BMR can go up by about 50% in such conditions. Obviously, the stress caused by these conditions increases the BMR. However, while computing energy requirements, we need to understand that along with, if the BMR is increasing, the individual actually is in bed. Therefore, the physical activity is lower. Therefore, in terms of total energy requirement, it might not affect much. But we are talking about factors affecting BMR. So here, certainly the BMR will go up, and hence the requirement for energy in these situations can be higher. In addition to the stress conditions, fevers, illnesses, undernutrition, that is when we do not take enough energy, even that influences the BMR, and the BMR can be lowered in individuals who are starved, who are undernourished. Therefore, we have looked at various factors. In this list, we also can include pregnancy, lactation. We said that pregnancy demands the deposition of tissues. We said that the metabolic rate increases, and pregnancy therefore impacts on BMR, and hence the increased energy requirement. Therefore, these factors which we have taken up are the factors which influence the BMR. I think what we can do is we can recapitulate these factors quickly on the screen, please, where body size and composition, age, gender, hormonal status, environmental conditions we've talked about, pregnancy, lactation, fever, illness, infection, injury, and the nutritional status, that is undernutrition, impacts on the nutritional requirement. From here, we will move on now to the factors which influence the thermic effect of food. If you, for example, the thermic effect of food is greater after consumption of carbohydrates and proteins rather than fat. Now, isn't that interesting? That means if you take a meal which contains more of carbohydrate, you will realize that the amount of energy required to metabolize carbohydrates is more than you would need if you were taking a purely fat meal. Very rarely you take a total fat meal, but the thermic effect of eating a protein or a carbohydrate meal is much more. And normally what we eat is a mixed diet. That is why, if you recall, we said that 10% of the total energy expenditure is because of the thermic effect of food. Consumption of a usual mixture of nutrients, what we call as a mixed diet, is generally considered to elicit increase in energy expenditure equivalent to 10% of the food's energy content. Now, these were the factors which affect the thermic effect of food. Now, let us move on to the third aspect, that is the factors which influence the physical activity. What are these factors? Well, when we talk about physical activity, we talk about our lifestyles. We have talked earlier that each individual, each one of us perform different kind of activities, and we have a different lifestyle. Some of us have a very active lifestyle, active in the sense our nature of work is such that they demand different kind of activities. Therefore, the different types of activities which individual takes impact on the energy requirement. It is just not the kind of activity, but the duration and the time spent on a particular activity will further impact on the energy requirement, what we call as the physical activity level. We will talk about it in a while from now, but this is another factor which impacts, and obviously the age influences the physical activity. Let us take these three aspects. If you look at the monitor, just for your a summary of these things, different types of activities, the time spent, or each activity task, and the energy cost of each activity throughout a theoretical 24-hour period. What I mean is intensity, duration, and frequency of the activity will influence the energy requirement and the age. We will take up each one of them, starting with the different type of activity levels. Like I said, individuals, depending on their nature of work, perform different activities. Some can be sedentary, Some individuals perform sedentary activities, the others what we call as the active or moderately active lifestyles, and some individuals follow a vigorous or vigorously active lifestyles. Now what you see on the monitor is are the examples of lifestyle which have been classified by the FAO, WHO, UNU. This is a joint consultation group which met earlier in 2001, and they have compiled a report of human energy requirements, and they have now categorized all kind of physical activities into these three category, which means that each one of us actually will fall in one of these category depending on the kind of work we do. We may be either sedentary or light activity lifestyles. We may be practicing either an active or moderately active lifestyle or a vigorous or vigorously active lifestyle. Now let's see where do we fall, in which activity we fall. So let us begin with the sedentary or the light activity lifestyle. You see, these are the people who have occupations that do not demand much physical effort. They are not required to walk long distances. They generally use motor vehicles for transportation. They do not exercise or participate in sports regularly, and spend most of their time sitting or standing with little body movements. That is, talking, reading, watching television, listening to the radio, using computers. So basically they have a sedentary lifestyle. Who are these individuals? Many of us, like teachers, office workers, the clerks, executives, typists. In urban areas, the housewives, who have access to energy saving devices and domestic help, they can get categorized into this first category of sedentary or light active lifestyles. Now, as compared to this lifestyle, let us look at the active or moderately active lifestyle. Those people have occupations that are not strenuous in terms of energy demand, but involve more energy expenditure than described earlier in the sedentary lifestyle. Alternatively, they can be those people who have sedentary occupation, but the certain amount of time they do spend in physical activity, either doing obligatory or discretionary activity, which we talked about. Continuing on this, who are these people? These are people who are their occupation includes servants, house cleaners, masons, construction workers, rural women in less developed traditional villages who participate in agricultural work or walk long distances to fetch water, fuel. So these individuals, they get categorized. Also those who actually perform some basic activities like 1 hour of strenuous exercise or jogging, running, cycling, in addition to a sedentary lifestyle, but do have this, get classified as moderately active. And from here, the last category, if we move on, this is the vigorous or vigorously active lifestyle. As the name suggests, these people engaged in strenuous work or in strenuous leisure activities for several hours. Examples are non-sedentary occupations, those individuals who swim or dance or do activities which require energy requirement. They can be non-mechanized agricultural laborers, people who work with a hoe, axe for several hours, or who walk long distances over rugged terrains, often carrying heavy loads, or coolies, or rickshaw pullers. Those kind of individuals who do strenuous work, they get categorized in this kind of lifestyle. And naturally, more the activity or more the strenuous work, more will be the energy requirement, and hence our energy requirement will be influenced by the kind of the lifestyle. I will quickly like to take up the second aspect which we talked about, the duration, intensity of the activity. Just not working on an activity or being classified in a lifestyle, but any activity we take, the frequency, the duration, the intensity will also influence the energy requirement. And for this, the WHO, FAO, UNU have now come up with what we call as the physical activity level. If you look at the monitor, the physical activity level is defined as the total energy required over 24 hours divided by the basal metabolic rate over 24 hours, which in simple terms mean that the total energy which is required in a 24-hour period, if you just divide that by the basal metabolic, which is the involuntary activity, that is your physical activity level. And in adult men and non-pregnant lactating women, BMR into PAL, or the physical activity level, is equal to the total energy expenditure. What are these physical activity levels? These physical activities, depending on the lifestyles we have explained earlier, the 3 lifestyles. This consultation, the WHO FAO UNU 2004 report, they have worked out these PAL values, and each individual, depending on the duration, intensity of their activity, gets categorized in these 3. And if you look at your monitor, these PAL values are given. For a sedentary or a light lifestyle activity, it is 1.4 to 1.69. For an active or a moderate, it is 1.7. And for a vigorously activity, it can be 2 to 2.5 activity level. Therefore, now you can see that how so far the physical lifestyle and the physical activity level influences the energy requirement. Therefore, what we have discussed today in this session is our energy requirements, the components which contribute, which I would like to sum up: the total energy expenditure, which includes the BMR, the thermogenesis, the physical activity in terms of the lifestyles as well as the physical activity level. But in children, the growth and development gets added on. In pregnancy and lactation, it is the deposition of tissue and the secretion of milk which gets added on, and together this accounts for the total energy requirements for different individuals in a population group. Thank you.